Hello folks, it feels so very weird to be here in person because this is the first time I have done this. Probably the last time I was here in 2019, so that's definitely a lifetime ago. Thank you so much for joining me. It's wonderful to see you. Come in. I'm just starting. Yeah, lovely to see you. Hope you're enjoying this event. It's fantastic to see conferences coming back in person and everybody supporting them, even though it is slightly weird. My name is Sarah Lean, for those that don't know me, and you are in the session that is managing that hybrid cloud architecture with Azure. So if you're not supposed to be here, time to leave and I won't be offended. But thank you so much for joining me, and thank you to our sponsors. I'm sure you've seen this a few times if you've been at sessions already, yesterday and today. These events don't happen without the support of our sponsors, so visit those that are there. I know there's a few people. Go up and see what swag Microsoft have, but I think they've been cleared out yesterday, but you know, it doesn't help to not ask. But yeah, thank you to all of these fantastic sponsors for hosting this event here, and to the organisers and to yourselves as well. So I know most of you in the audience, I recognise a few faces, but for those that don't know me, my name is Sarah Lean. I've been in IT for about 17 years, which feels a bit scary saying. It makes me feel very old, especially when I talk to some high school students these days, and that's how old they are. But yeah, I've been in the IT industry for 17 odd years, and I'm in that IT pro side of things, sysadmin, desktop support, whatever category or flavour you want to use to identify us. And yeah, I used to love installing servers and fighting with those great server cage nuts, but now I've moved over to fighting with YAML and JSON and bicep templates and all the fun that involves in the cloud as well. But that's where I focus my energy and attention, on the IT pro side of things and the infrastructure side of things. You'll not hear me call myself a developer, even if I do spend a lot of time inside Visual Studio Code these days. I'm the founder of the Glasgow Azure User Group. We are back in person, so I'm going to do my marketing spiel. So if you want to come along, if you're local, please do come along. We've announced our August date, so we'll hopefully see some of the local faces there as well. And if you want to follow me on social media, I'm TechieLass, or you can find my blog, techielass.com. Now, I know we're in Scotland today, but what I really like to do at my presentations is take a bit of Scotland with me, because I am very Scottish. I'm very, very proud of that. And if you'll indulge me a little, I've got some slides to show you. So this is the Highland cow, or Highland cow, as you might see from lots of tourist things. Now, what I like to do with this is actually explain a bit about the Highland cow. Come in. Because a lot of people don't realise that the Highland cow is very adaptable. It's a native breed here in Scotland, and it has two coats. So it has that outer layer that you see that helps keep the wind and the rain off them, and then underneath there's a furry layer that keeps them warm, maybe in the summer as well as the winter, come in, but also helps them keep cool. They're very adaptable to the Scottish climate. And I think they're quite synonymous with us as IT professionals, whether you're a developer, whether you're a database engineer, desktop engineer, because we have to adapt all the time. The technologies is always changing and we have to learn new things. And let's face it, our end users are quite demanding as well, and ask us to adapt all the time. So yeah, I love the Highland cow, and I think they are quite relevant to the IT industry as well. So there's a few Scottish folk in here, but I know there's a few faces that aren't Scottish. So let's have a look at teaching you some Scottish, so as you go away with some Scottish phrases from this week. So keep the heat means stay calm and don't get upset, and that's what I'm trying to do here behind this lectern. Keep the heat and stay calm. Hod your wisht, which is something my mum and my husband are always telling me, which means be quiet. We've also got I'm pure done in, and you're probably going to want to use this one at the end of today, because that means I'm tired. Scunnered is also another one you could use for being tired, but yeah, surely we'll all be a bit tired at the end of today. You'll have heard Bonnie, and you'll have heard Bonnie Scotland, and that actually means beautiful. So when you hear the tourist board talking about Bonnie Scotland, what they're talking about is beautiful Scotland. Although today's weather might not actually make you think that today. We've also got I, which means yes, so you might hear me say that all the time, or you'll hear me say no, which is no, and I really need to learn how to say that a bit more these days. We've also got we, and that means small, so I feel very, very small in front of this big ass screen today. And last but not least, banter, which means joking around, having a laugh. And these few slides have been a bit of banter, so I hope you've enjoyed that. And if you take nothing else away from this session, you've learnt some Scottish today. But what the purpose of this session really is about is talking about IT environments and how we manage the evolving IT environments that we have. And today we have such a diverse IT environment. We've got thousands of different ways of hosting what we have. Applications, we have databases, we have these things called containers and these things called serverless as well. And then we look at the programming languages, and there's a whole host of them. Some of the new ones that are coming up completely surprise me, and I think that's when I'm starting to feel a bit old. But we also have hundreds of ways of actually trying to host those applications and deal with the new things that are coming along. We've got data centers that might be in the next room to you if you're back in the office. You've got hosted data centers, you've got branch offices, you've got that dedicated OEM hardware, starting to think about Azure Stack HCI and things like that. We've also got these weird and wonderful things, IoT devices and edge devices. You know, we've got Wi-Fi in our washing machines and God knows what else these days, and we have to think about the security and managing those devices. And then we look towards the cloud, and you've got things like Azure and AWS and Google and all the other cloud providers out there as well. And when we start to think about this in an IT organisation, it can be quite overwhelming trying to manage all of that and trying to keep on track of everything, trying to be at the forefront of the latest technology, but then also trying to keep a bit of control so that you don't fail your audits and you fail your security policies as well. We have to try and keep in track of all of this as well. And this is what I really want to talk to you today about, is managing that hybrid environment, managing that diverse environment that we have within the IT department, and thinking really about the tools that can help us, either making our life a little bit easier from our day-to-day tasks, or actually starting to look at consistency and avoiding that inconsistency that can happen when we have that diverse infrastructure. But also really thinking about why, because there are a lot of tools out there that you can use, but really dialing into why we want to pick some tools, because let's face it, we've maybe all went to a conference, saw a shiny tool and then ran back to our work and said, we need to use this, and not really understood why, just because we saw that shiny bit of technology. So let's focus in on the why today. And the first thing I want to highlight is Windows Admin Center. Now, many of you may already know Windows Admin Center, but there might be a few of you that don't really understand the possibilities that Windows Admin Center brings to you. Now, Windows Admin Center is a remote management console for your Windows server. It's browser-based for you. So you already have the technology there to be able to interact with Windows Admin Center. It's a small download that you have to have, and the license is free as long as you have a Windows Server license. So hopefully, if you're running Windows Server, you are licensed for it. So ultimately, you are licensed to run Windows Admin Center as well. What Windows Admin Center gives you is the ability to interact with those Windows servers. Now, you probably went to sessions today or yesterday that will say that servers are a dead technology and we're moving away from everything, but I know for a fact that Windows Server is still going to be around for a long time, and thinking about some of the facts I remember when I was at Microsoft, there are a ton of Windows servers that are going to be there for a lifetime yet. So Windows Admin Center can help you understand and manage all of your Windows servers, whether they live on a physical bit of server tin, whether they're virtual, whether they live in an on-premise data center, hosted in Azure or hosted in another cloud provider. You can bring all of those Windows Admin Centers into the Windows Admin Center and manage them. You can manage those day-to-day tasks that you might have, checking event logs, digging into why people are saying that your servers are slow, monitoring that, monitoring capacity needs, understanding what's happening, applying those patches that you might have to apply once a month, and let's face it, we still have to do that. But it also starts to think about how you can interact with Azure as well. So for a lot of organisations, they're still actually moving in towards the cloud, and being able to use Windows Admin Center leads you into using those hybrid technologies that we have. But it also helps you stay in that one pane of glass. And let's face it, we all like tools that help us stay in that single pane of glass, and we don't have to have thousands of tabs open or remember different addresses, Windows Admin Center can bring that all into play. And that makes your life a lot easier, streamlines what you're doing every day and makes it less complex, because let's face it, it's getting more complex out there as we go in the IT world. What's great about Windows Admin Center as well is it interacts with your operating system, but it can also interact with the hardware that you're potentially running in your own data center or in a private cloud as well. With Windows Admin Center, they've actually partnered with a bunch of hardware providers. So you've got things like Lenovo and HPE and all the other different ones you can see on there. So if you're managing your hardware for that, you can actually manage it from within Windows Admin Center. So you don't have to go off and look for that obscure tool that your hardware provider has told you to go and install and find out what IP address is installed or find out how to interact with it. It can be within Windows Admin Center as well. And there's a lot of great integration there as well. So if you're managing the hardware, looking at failed disks and things like that and trying to figure out which disk you have to pop, it can show you what is happening within the Windows Admin Center. And the reason that these companies have been able to actually bring their hardware integration into Windows Admin Center is because you can actually make extensions for Windows Admin Center. So maybe it doesn't do what you need it to do today, but you have a bunch of talented developers. You can actually start to build your own extension as well, because it's built on technology such as HTML5, CSS, Angular, TypeScript, jQuery. I don't know what all that is, but surely you have some developers that can help you piece all the puzzles together. And you have 3 types of extensions that you can actually make. So your solution extensions allow you to plug into things like Windows Server, your desktop PCs even, your clusters, Azure Stack HCI, and you can build on that. Then when you want to interact with those bits of solutions, you can build on your tool extensions, and that's where you can have that UI and make it a lot easier for you. Ultimately at the back end is using PowerShell and WHMI queries, but if you're not wanting to use those protocols to interact with the solution, you can use what's called a gateway plugin, and you can use any protocol to be able to plug into it as well. What you can do once you've made an extension is either publish it and try and get it publicly available so the entire world can use it, or you can have it privately available and just interact with your own IT department. So Windows Admin Center has a lot of power available to it, and I think a lot of people underestimate what it can actually do for you inside your environment. So as I said, it's free to go and do as long as you have a Windows Server license. It's a small download, and within a matter of minutes you can actually get started with it. I use it in my own environment at home. I have a small lab environment, and being able to interact with that saves me having to remember the IP addresses, various different passwords, what did I do, all of that. It's a great tool for just helping you be more efficient when you're actually interacting with your Windows servers. Now, staying on the Windows Server path, let's think about updates, because keeping your servers up to date is a challenge. It always is. It's always that pain every month or every week when you have to roll out the patches. When we think about the diverse environment that we have physical machines, we have virtual machines, we have Windows machines, we have Linux machines, and they both have different cadences around when they have to have patches applied. And we really want to solve that challenge. And that's where Azure Update Management actually comes into play. It can help you check the compliance of your servers, so you have a great checking ability. So if you have an auditor coming in, you can see what's happening and show them that you're either up to date or you're not up to date, depending on where you are on that journey. And it can help you actually deploy and install those up-to-dates. Back in the day when I was looking after servers, we had to use WSUS. I can't remember what that acronym means nowadays. But it was a lot of a manual process. There was not a lot of automation. I had to go in at 2 a.m. in the morning, press the automation button, restart the servers, watch it all happen. With Azure Update Management, we can start to schedule all of that. You can schedule those things to happen at 2 a.m. in the morning. You can schedule deployment windows, say 120 minutes, 240 minutes, however big the window needs to be. Update Management will then figure out if it can apply all the patches inside that window. If it can't, it won't actually allow those patches to be deployed, which is either a great thing or a bad thing, depending on how you think about it. But if you've got a short window for those production servers, the last thing you want to do is run into that and have to have your big boss shouting at you and demanding what's happening. So it's quite clever in the technology that it can do. And it copes with your Windows and your Linux servers. You don't have to go off and remember all the weird and wonderful commands and flavours of Linux and have to maybe look after an internal repository to apply your updates. And I think that's really the power of it. And it doesn't have to be an Azure server that you're patching. It can be an on-prem server. It can be one in GCP. It can be one in AWS. It has that ability for you to manage everything regardless of where it is. And one of the things that I think as well people forget is this is ultimately a free tool inside Azure. The cost to you is really just the logging for log analytics. So there's a small monetary charge for it, but ultimately it's very small. It's probably less than you've paid for a coffee cup today. If you check out this interview that I did about a year ago now with the product team, they go into more details around that and explain the cost as well. So it's a great product. There's lots of changes on the roadmap. I know that much is coming along, and there's more preview versions coming out. But Azure Update Management is one of those services that you could start to use in your environment if you haven't gone fully cloud. It's a little step in the right direction for starting to manage things better and make things a lot better in your environment. Now, governance. It's a thing that we all try to do, but we hate to do it because, let's face it, no one wants to play the big baddie that stops people from doing things or says you have to do something in a certain way. But governance shouldn't be about controlling, shouldn't be about stopping people from doing things. We want to use the latest and greatest technologies out there, but we also need to be mindful of the compliance that we need to comply to for our organisation. We don't want those auditors coming in and finding holes in our environment and finding things that can stop us and potentially get us fines. But we also don't want people to go off and do things on their own and have that shadow IT as well. So we have to find that right balance, and that's where we have to have this governance in place and start to think about how we can look after what we're doing and organise it. Especially if we're looking at on-prem, cloud, then we've got containers, then we've got servers, then we've got functions, serverless. That can be a lot of things that you have to manage and have to think about each day. If you can automate it, if you can set something up that makes it a lot easier for you, then it's a win for everybody in the environment. And that's where Azure Policy comes into play. Now, Azure Policy isn't a new service. It isn't the latest and greatest. It isn't the fanciest and shiniest bit of technology inside Azure. But what it really does is allows you to have a good understanding of what your environment is doing. Now, I remember when I used Azure Policy, when I first started to look at Azure, and all it could do was audit what was happening. It could only look at the environment and tell you whether you were not doing something and you needed to look at it, but it's grown significantly since then. So we can do that auditing, we can have that real-time policy mechanism if you want to, but we can also start to enforce the things that we want to, do that remediation. We can change how someone has deployed something, we can add on tagging if they haven't done that for you, but let's hope that everybody's like bicep templates has tagging built into them and you don't have to do that remediation. But we can also start to look at inside our resources as well. We can start to configure some of our virtual machines. So, for example, one thing that I always do in my home lab with Azure Policy is make sure all of the virtual machines are on the same time zone, because that can confuse the hell out of you, and it can also make things go really bad, and you can have some issues with that. There's a lot of power with Azure Policy, both from the management group level within your Azure subscription, within the subscription level, or even just at the resource group level. So you have that granularity that you can apply across the board. And we're starting to look at actually doing it outside of Azure as well. So we can use Azure Policy on non-Azure machines as well to actually look at what's happening. And again, have that overall view of what's happening in this diverse environment that no doubt we have inside our IT department these days. The guest policy thing, looking at what's inside your virtual machines, is actually quite powerful. There's a lot you can do. I've often heard it described as the alternative to group policy, but anyone who's used group policy and the power of that will know that this isn't quite the equivalent to it. But it can start to look at some of the things that you need to do. Some of those, like I said, time zone settings, or if you want to check that people aren't accidentally putting themselves into the admin group or putting the wrong people in there. There's a lot of things that you can start to configure and remediate or audit depending on the policies. There's a lot of policies that are already pre-built into the Azure policy portal. So you've got the ones that the product team have done, or you've got ones where you can build your own, so you can create your own. And then there's community repositories as well. So there's a lot that you can leverage here. You don't have to start from scratch. You don't have to think about the things that you have to look at. If you look at the built-in policies, there's a lot of things to think about, and you can start to just apply them at a click of a button across your environment. Now those tools are fantastic, and they're great if you want to just plug in little bits within your hybrid environment or start to look at moving towards Azure. However, they've released Azure Arc, which is a really powerful tool when we think about how we can pull this diverse environment together. With Azure Arc, we can have that single pane of glass or single control plane with Azure Arc the heart of it. And that's kind of key. For a lot of organisations, they'll be using multi-cloud, they'll have a hybrid environment with Azure at the forefront of it, where it's the single source of truth, if you like. And I feel like a marketeer with all those single control planes and single source of truth. But that's really what Azure Arc is doing. It's really the power of it. With Azure Arc, in a lot of cases you install an agent on it, and what it does is extend Azure to that non-Azure environment. So you can really leverage the power of it. Now there's lots of things you can do just from the virtual machine world. We've also got SQL Server. We can do a lot of powerful things with the SQL Server. We can start to do containers. We can start to look at our Azure Stack HCI and have containers controlled on there. We can even have looking at functions on non-Azure things, which is just weird and wonderful. How do you deploy an Azure function on something that isn't Azure ultimately? Azure Arc allows you to do that. So you could have these functions and services on your on-prem environment. Say you want to use that as your staging environment and play around and learn and test then, and then have your production in Azure. And that hopefully will allow you to have a like for like, have a very modern solution, an environment going on with Azure Arc. You know, Azure Arc pulls in a lot of the services that I've just talked about. So Azure Policy, Azure Update Management, they can all be leveraged using Azure Arc. So we can start to configure Azure Arc on our machines, on our Kubernetes clusters, on our containers. And then because we've set it up all correctly, all of the other things come on board with us. Our update management, our policies, maybe our monitoring, whatever's happening, Azure Arc can help you do that all within really just one click of a button often with that. If you do it properly, then it can be quite powerful with Azure Arc. Now there's other things like machine learning we now have. I think that was announced at, was it last build or this build? I get confused with all the conferences that happen and all the announcements. But we have Azure Arc enabled data services and machine learning. Like I said, we have the Azure Arc enabled application services. We've got that infrastructure, so Windows Server, Linux servers, containers. We can start to look at doing things with VMware, Azure Stack HCI as well, and trying to bring that even more into the fold towards Azure. Although that always confuses me because Azure Stack HCI, how is it not already an Azure service? But we'll go with it. We're also starting to look at things like SCVM. So if you're using System Center Virtual Machine Manager on-prem, we can actually hook in that host for that SCVM and then start to deploy virtual machines from the Azure portal to that host because of Azure Arc. Now that's a preview service, so that obviously comes with a little note of interest. It's a preview service, but that's the power of where Azure Arc is taking us. It's been able to have Azure at the center of what we're all doing and what we're all thinking about. And I think that's really key, being able to take Azure to our non-Azure services if Azure is at the forefront of what we're doing. If we think about some of the other things we can do with it, if you have like on-prem environments, we can have Azure Arc installed on, say, our SQL Server on our on-prem environment. We can then look at configuring it and optimizing it using the power of, what do they call it now? Is it Microsoft Defender for Cloud and Azure Sentinel? You can bring the power of that. You can audit if there's security risks, if there's things you can do to improve what's happening within your SQL server. Now, I'm not a SQL engineer and it's been a while since I've been there, but maybe you want to optimize some queries or how your servers are running. You can have that power that you have within Azure from things like Microsoft Defender and Azure Sentinel, and bringing that on-prem or bringing that to things that maybe people have deployed within AWS and you want to start to understand them and control them. Not in a negative way, a bit better as well. There's lots of scenarios where pulling Azure Arc into the scenario helps extend it, helps make it a lot better for you as well. Now, I've only mentioned a few of the tools that you could use for hybrid, but let's have a look at some of the other ones just briefly. Azure Backup and Azure Site Recovery have really been hybrid since they were released. One of the first projects I ever did with these technologies was around helping to support an on-prem environment, replacing that second data center that my customer had for their disaster recovery environment, and actually leveraging Azure Backup and Azure Site Recovery to make Azure the second DR site. So if you think about it, we've had hybrid technology for a long, long time in Azure. It's just not been called hybrid, or we've not thought about it as hybrid. God, I love marketing, right? But these technologies can really help you, again, make Azure that central point of view, make them the important factors for you. Azure Monitor, I've not really talked about that, but we could talk about that in depth. We want to monitor what's happening. We want to have that single control plane, and we can do that with Azure Monitor as well. We can bring in all the log files. We can look at things. That can be our control plane for our monitoring. And again, Azure Arc helps extend that as well. So again, Azure Arc is really the one that is at the forefront of what we're trying to do with the hybrid architecture. And then Azure File Sync. Now, this is a cool bit of technology if you've never used it, and I'm sure a few of you had, because it has been around for a long time, but it allows you to extend your file servers. It allows you to get more space on your file servers without actually having to put that physical disks or adding more NAS or SAS onto your environment. It's very much like what we have with OneDrive, although I'm sure the Azure File Sync team will not like that comparison. But you can have all of your files backed up into the cloud and have access to them. And again, this is hybrid technology that we've had for a while from the Windows Server team, and being able to use Azure to extend what we're having and enhance our environment and make our lives a lot easier as well. The thing to remember is the why. These bits of technologies are fantastic, but why do you want to use them? And it goes back to what I said at the very start of the presentation. We want to streamline what our day-to-day looks like. We want to make it easier for us on a day-to-day basis. We want to extend what we're trying to do, and we want to allow people to have the innovation to be able to go off and do things with containers, Kubernetes, with serverless. They want to explore and make things better for our business, but we want to have that control. We want to have that oversight of what's happening. So we want to give them enough rope to go off and play with things, but we also want to make sure that we're not breaching any security policies or audit policies or any budgetary policies as well, because let's face it, one of the big things we all see with Azure policy is people locking down what SKUs, what pricing things you can use within Azure, and we want to make sure that we're keeping everything A-OK within our environments. And that's what you should be remembering. When you're designing your hybrid architecture, when you're thinking about multi-cloud environments, think about why you're doing it, what is the reason, what is the business value, and then dial into it. Again, none of these technologies might be appropriate to you, but hopefully you'll find the why behind some of them and be able to enhance your environment. Now, there's lots of things out there that you can use to learn and figure out more about these, but my favourite ones are what's on screen today. So we've got the Azure Arc Jumpstart learning capabilities, and this is actually very cool. When they first launched this, I was a bit sceptical, I'll be honest, but what's actually happened is the team have spent a lot of time building out documentation and also automation scenarios for learning about Azure Arc. So what you can do is if you go to the Jumpstart page, which I think is aka.ms/jumpstart, You can actually download a template or apply a template to Azure. What it'll do is it'll roll out a whole Azure Arc environment for you within your subscription. All set up, all configured, all the hard work done for you. I did it the other day, set it off before I went for my lunch, came back and it was all there for me to have a click around and try, and it can be used as proof of concept. There's various different scenarios you can dig into. So there's ones for IT pros, there's one for all of the Azure Arc services that they can enable, or there's one for developers as well. So you can have a play around with it depending on what you want. And again, you just have to click a button and then check out what passwords and how you use it. It's a great thing for being able to play with Azure Arc and really understand the power of it if you're maybe building a business case for your environment or trying to teach someone else how to use it in the non-production environment. And Microsoft Learn, not new, it's been around for a while now, and I'm sure all of you have used it in some capacity, but it's definitely a resource to have a look at. It's constantly growing, there's constantly new things to be doing. I think the Microsoft team upstairs are running a Cloud Skills Challenge where you can run, is it speakers or headphones or a Surface Go or something if you complete some challenges. So it's that great competition that you can go into, and I know a lot of organisations run competitions internally as well to encourage people to actually do things within Microsoft Learn. And last but not least, the Azure Architecture Centre. Now, I don't know how many of you have used this, but it's a great resource for understanding how all of these services, both in a hybrid nature and in an Azure-only nature, actually connect into each other and help you solidify your knowledge. There is a lot of work goes into this Azure Architecture Centre, and a lot of them actually come from real-world customer scenarios. So the data has obviously been anonymised, but that architecture is there and it's tried and tested for a lot of customers at Microsoft, and it's always being added to. Doesn't quite feel like that because it can be a bit slow for them to add new architecture diagrams, but they are working at it, and it's great for trying to understand what's happening, or if you've been thrown a curveball by your boss and have to figure out a new service and where it fits inside the architecture, you can have a look at the Architecture Centre and hopefully give you some real world examples to actually learn from as well. And it wouldn't be an Azure presentation without giving the Cloud Adoption Framework a little shout out. The Cloud Adoption Framework is a massive set of documentation where you can go off and learn a lot about it. It's great if you're starting to define your Azure journey, and it's also great if you're in the middle of your Azure journey or your cloud journey and you've decided that it's not working and you need to start again, and how you undo some of your decisions. It's also got the Azure Well Architected Framework that's part of it as well, and it can help you with best practices, naming conventions, costs, security. There's a whole host of things in there. It used to be really easy to read, maybe over a couple of days, but it's grown so much, the Cloud Adoption Framework, that you just have to go and search for the bit that you want the answer to and dive into it. But the team are constantly improving it, constantly changing it. When new services come on board, the Cloud Adoption Framework is part of being updated. So it's definitely something to look at. If you haven't looked at it for a while, go and refresh yourself. There's a lot in there that's happening as well. Folks, that's me. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've got questions, or I've got time for questions. I've not got any questions, but if you've got questions, I'm happy to take them. But thank you so much, folks, and I hope that has been useful to you as well. Hello. That's a hard one. So for those that, I think I'm being live streamed, so I'll repeat the questions. Graham was asking about how feature rich Azure Stack HCI is versus native Azure. I don't think it's necessarily a replacement for native Azure. I think there's still some holes in there. But what it allows you is more flexibility. The team are constantly building it. I think actually, I don't know if Kenny Lowe's here today or if his session was yesterday and he's talking about Azure Stack HCI, but it's a good alternative. It's not a replacement for Azure. I don't even think the Azure Stack HCI team would say that, but it's a good way of trying to breach the gap or have that Azure service if you're in a non-connected world thinking submarines, maybe oil rigs, all that kind of thing. It allows you to start to use some of the capabilities, but I don't think it's fully feature rich, to be honest. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, just for the folk on the live stream, the question is about Azure File Sync versus something else like SharePoint. I've seen a lot of customers use File Sync. I don't know how many. I don't know if I would go down the SharePoint route. That sounds like a lot of pain, but it's obviously an option. I guess each scenario fits people differently, and that's why I was saying remember the why. There are certain points where Azure File Sync will actually make a lot of sense, but then there's a tipping point with any technology, right, where it doesn't make sense. So I guess it's an individual case by case. It's an option. It's one of those ones you list all the options, figure out which one works best. But yeah, it is still a well-adopted technology, to be honest. Yes?
There are two questions. Is Arc agentless or agent-based? Depend on what technology you're trying to manage.
Yeah, so the question is about Azure Arc agent versus agentless. So it'll depend on what you're trying to connect into. For example, for the virtual machines, there's an agent you have to install and manage. And when you start to get down Kubernetes and things like that, I haven't really played with it, but yeah, there's not completely agentless as far as I'm aware.
Second question about update management.
Yes.
I don't know how deep can update management go? I'm thinking as regards security baselines and detecting if machines are part of the cluster or if they're part of the HA configuration. How many options can you get from it apart from just the time scheduling and stuff like that?
Yep, so the question is around the power of Azure Update Management, really, versus, say, our friend WSUS. There's a lot of power in Azure Update Management from that base level. If we're starting to get into more complex environments, it's probably not quite there when you start to look at clustering and which levels everything is. You'd probably still have to do the manual, well, cluster 1's at this point, cluster 2's at that point. It's not cluster aware, if that's really what the question is. Yeah, it's not going to detect what you are, so you have to be clever in terms of scheduling and making sure you don't include all your cluster nodes, otherwise you're going to have a painful morning. But yeah, it is what it is. The team are constantly working on it. I know there's a preview version kicking about somewhere on top of it, but yeah, that's still very much on the roadmap as far as I'm aware. Anybody else? Yes? Mm-hmm. Yep. So the question's around where Azure Update Management can play a part in like non-operating system updates. So yes and no. So you can plug WSUS into Azure Update Management, so you can pull things down. So for that disconnected, you can also plug it into System Center. So which version of that is SCCM? We still calling it SCCM. You can plug it into those kind of on-prem technologies and have the reporting and do it that way. Azure Update Management is more around the operating system patches. So I don't know if we include like Defender updates and stuff like that as an operating system patch yet. Probably not. So yeah, as long as it's kind of in that operating system way. But if you've got disconnected scenarios or you don't want things going up into Azure or the internet, you're probably looking at like a WSUS server or an SCCM server, managing that and having all of that in play as well. Okay. Anybody for any more? No? All gone shy? Awesome. I've got some stickers here, folks. If you want stickers, I don't know if we're still doing stickers at conferences nowadays, but yeah. Thank you so much, folks. I really do appreciate it, and it's lovely to be back in person again. So thank you.